Hello, my name is Liza Maria, and today as a guest on my video, I have Philip Linden from my first podcast with the Lunar Podcast, and today he's going to answer the questions from the viewers. Hi, Phil. How are you doing today?
Hi, Eliza. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
That's great. So, to start off, the first question is when did you first fall in love with space, or how you developed this space passion?
It's kind of hard to answer that question because I'm not really sure. As a kid growing up, I loved race cars, and I thought that my dream was to do the wings on Formula One cars and be the person that designs those. Turns out those wings are just wings on planes, and planes are cool. And then rockets and satellites are the coolest kind of planes. That but yeah, I was into planes for a long time, and then SpaceX really started hitting its stride when I was in high school, and the new space revolution, CubeSats, just became a thing, and were really taking off in popularity right when I was um, deciding on my career. And the fact that something so complicated could be like maybe attainable if I would just worked a little bit harder uh, was really what propelled me into it. And ever since, it's just been the coolest thing.
That's awesome. And someone wanted to know what kind of student you were in school as a teen or kid.
Um, so I wasn't a cool kid, obviously. I was nerdy, but I tended to float around between groups at school. So I would be that one guy who has a friend that's like in every clique and but not really be a part of any one of them. Um, and then toward high school, I spent a lot of time on the internet online, where I found most of my friends or good friends at the time were my internet friends. Um, and as far as like studies and schools go, I had a knack for math. I really liked engineering because I thought it was fun. Um, I had a knack for English and stuff too, and I just yeah, I spent my time elsewhere, not thinking about school that much. I was fortunate enough to have good grades without um, too much problems.
That's cool. That's cool. So, the next question is, what were your first hobbies or interests in your university time compared to now? And can you tell us like a story from your college life?
Yeah. Well, right now, I love tabletop role-playing games like D&D, and I didn't realize that's what I loved until like a couple years ago. So at the time, in college, I was doing a lot of gaming. I was playing a lot of video games, but I also happened to meet um, other people at school that were like, "We really like space. We really want to work in space. We can't like our school didn't have a space program or really professors that were hosting clubs and things. So we kind of just made our own. Um, like no one else is doing it. Well, I guess that we have to do it ourselves then. And then in our free time, we picked like some some student competitions, and we're like, let's do that. And then we had the hubris of or naivety of thinking that how hard could it be? It's just a CubeSat. And then we didn't have the intelligence or wisdom, I guess, to realize how much work that was. So yeah, it was great. We learned a lot along the way. And we just basically ended up making little benchtop experiments. And one of the things that really solidified my love of the space industry was in college. I My main hobby was a podcast, not unlike yours, actually, where I Um, I was talking with my friends in this space group, right? And we were at a big dinner. It was the end of the year. We were all celebrating. And me and my friend were talking about like, will SpaceX actually land a rocket? Is rocket reusability worth it? Right? This is way back in 2015. And when a few minutes into the conversation, I realized that it was kind of quiet. And I looked around and everybody at the table was listening to me and my friend have this conversation with interest. Everybody was like interested to hear how we were talking. And I thought to myself, like, we're doing a podcast. That's a podcast. Let's do this more. And so we found people at the university to talk to, interviews like this, but also like space news and things. And then NASA is really, really open with students and education things. So emailing NASA and saying, hey, can we talk to the project scientist for James Webb Space Telescope? And they're like, sure, are you free on Tuesday? Right? Stuff like that. And the people that work in the space industry are just like the most passionate and intelligent people. Um, that is so just amazing to talk to people like that. Yeah, so I did the podcast for most of those. It's not really active now, but that was my main hobby.
That sounds nice. And I also started this with my podcast because I really like space for like a really long time, 4 years. And that sounds really cool. And now a question more into space and your space work. What was your favorite part of working in space?
Um, my favorite, I have this uh I've found a pattern in a lot of the things I do. Just recently, I've noticed this pattern, and that's doing extraordinary things with ordinary ingredients. Is like the slam dunk that I'm always chasing. That kind of like, hey, like you didn't think this was possible with this thing. You thought you needed something way more expensive or way more fancy, but I did it. And in my career through my internships. I was an intern at SpaceX, and then later I worked at Lockheed Martin and now at Planet Labs. That's kind of the goal, at least at SpaceX and Planet, where it's like these new companies, or new at the time, we're trying to prove that we don't need 60 years of government funding, government military funding in order to develop this technology. We can do it because we're smart. We can do it because we go to Lowe's across the street and buy some parts and hack it together because it works, not because it's like the right way. We learn what the right way is by trying things and being creative. And yeah, that's the best part about it. And kind of that's what I love about working in space is being creative about these really, really hard problems and then finding the simple solution or finding the simple explanation and sharing that with somebody and seeing them be like, wow, that's amazing. I'm like, yeah, I know. Uh, so yeah.
So right now we have a question from one of the viewers that wanted to ask you this question. Since our first podcast with the Lunar Podcast and everything, and the
Mhm.
question is, do you have an idea of having a universal time for the solar system, or do the changes in the gravitational field in the orbits?
Yeah, I saw this question and my first thought was a joke, but actually I'm serious about this, and that's like, no, there isn't one. Um, and it's because every like local area in space-time, every gravity well, every solar system, um, it has its own time, right? There are lumps in space-time. And because of that, Like time progresses differently across all of these things. And so the system that humanity or whatever will have to come up with is not a universal time, but instead it just a agreed way to convert between these times in a way that's precise enough. So, for example, taking measurements of observable things that across the solar system, you can measure a pulsar, its frequency. A pulsar is a fast spinning quasar that basically it lighthouses around and it gets brighter and dimmer at a very regular interval. And we can measure those, and we've measured that they are really, really stable, or we've characterized their stability as well. So if I look at this, if I say, hey, I'm looking at point A and I measure it at 5 milliseconds per pulse, um, and then someone else across the solar system measures it, they're looking at that same thing, they measure it, and then we can compare. And then also like some networking thing that somebody has to figure out will be the way to say, like, hi, right now it's 3 p.m. for me. What time is it where you are? Then we can figure out how to progress. Yeah.
Yes, and um, I hope this person that asked this question is gonna see this because, yes, this was an old question. And the next question here is, I'm sure other than your passion for space, you also have lots of passions probably for other things other than space. And you even said this on our podcast.
Yeah.
And as a space enthusiast, do you practice any sports probably?
Embarrassingly, not really. Um, I um it's much easier for me to get to do things that I see in my mind and do them when it only depends on my mind because my body doesn't quite work the way my mind says it should. But think doing things outside, I love riding my motorcycle is my main thing that I do outside. Um, and lately I've been taking my camera. I bought a camera recently, and I've been finding places to go and just walking around and taking pictures of people and things that are interesting, or um, just people being people. And so it's not a sport, but that's um, the most active I really get. Um, Unfortunately, one of the things that I really loved and want to do more of is actually rock climbing. Um, because it's a puzzle with your body, as the coolest way to explain that. And because of that, it also uses every muscle in your body, and your back gets ripped and your arms are super strong, and you use your legs more than your arms actually if you're doing it right. And so it's a full body workout, but the whole time you're not thinking about working out, you're thinking about how do I solve the problem. So yeah, quite a few of my friends still rock climb. Um, yeah,
That sounds cool. And other than sports, do you play any instruments? Like,
yeah, yeah. I this is my sister's guitar. I try to play guitar, but my hands are too big, and the strings are too small, right? So I like the bass guitar because it has big fat strings and the things are far apart, and it's easier to play one string at a time. Um, Playing bass guitar is hard when you don't have like a crew to like a friend with a guitar or a drum set or whatever to play with. Um, so I've been uh having, like every once in a while I see a YouTube video of where is it? Of like, for example, an ocarina, which is a type of flute basically. Um, I have a 12-hole instrument here. This was like $30 on Amazon. Um, and so I just like all these. you have to put your fingers over certain holes to make certain sounds, and you have to blow in the hole a certain way to make it sound right. Um, and so that was the thing I did for a little while, which was like follow tutorials and learn how to do it. And I got to the point where I um could figure like I could play Never Gonna Give You Up. And then I was like, okay, I've peaked, and I haven't really touched it since. But I'm always bouncing around between these creative things. Learning, I find, is the hobby, is that's the real hobby, you know? So yeah,
That's really cool because I also play guitar for like few months, and also I used to play piano like for a really long time. So yeah.
yeah. Topic and um like I'm one person, but I work with a lot of people that have been in the space industry for a long time and are very similar in that in terms of interests and things. And I'm always surprised at how the things I learn about other people I work with, like playing an instrument like guitar, like for example, our friend Pablo from Mundau, you're on Spotify and you just found, you're like, wait a minute, this sounds like Pablo. And it turns out he had a side project where him and his friend made music and published it on Spotify, right? Um, so that and like also photography and motorcycles, ironically enough, are really popular in among people that work in space, which is kind of funny. But yeah, these are the things I do, but it's not, that doesn't mean really like, that doesn't set me apart, I guess, from pretty much everybody else. And that's so fun to explore other people's hobbies.
Yes. And last question here is, do you think in the future we're going to have more space travels, like only to travel in space?
Um, I have an answer and a question. So yes, I think that in the future it will be commonplace to use rockets or spaceships to travel between planets, or even to travel from like New York to Tokyo in 3 hours, right? Because you're just doing a rocket, waiting for the Earth to turn and coming back down. That's a realistic thing to expect in the next 50 years. Um, and likewise, being in a space station, or, paying for a ferry to go from Earth to Mars. Um, the caveat to that is that assumes that we have a reason to go there. So in the next 50 years, I think that's still an unsolved problem. Is like right now we're trying to figure out, can we go? Is this possible? And we're going to figure it out in the next 50 years. But in order for that to be normal, we have to have a reason to do that all the time and not just sometimes to prove a point. My question is, like, what do you have any more insight about what this question was getting at? Like, what specifically they were asking about, what's possible or what to expect?
More like what to expect from this.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's easy to imagine uh, people riding on rockets, um, and congregating in a space station and then departing from it, like using a space station as essentially a train station or a ferry station today, um, more akin to long ocean voyages before air travel was commonplace. I think we're going to basically repeat that, except instead of traveling across oceans, we're going to be traveling across um, space. So there's so many unsolved problems, but it's just because we haven't found a way that really, like, it's not that it's not possible, it's that we haven't found a way to do it practically, um, or a reason to do it practically that can really motivate people to start building businesses around this and investing and um, that's the first step really is having a reason to go. And um, but yeah, I can see like people your age being it not being uncommon to spend some time in a space station. Um, and it might be exotic, to go to the moon, like it's exotic to go to Aruba, right? It's a place that not many people go, but some people live there, I see space travel being the same way by like 2075.
Well, thank you, Phil, for joining me here today and answering questions from the viewers. And it was great having you here.
Yeah, thanks. These were fun. And Eliza and me are both members of Moondao. Um, if if you join the Moondao Discord, you can DM us anytime and have more of these questions. Um, yeah, I'm happy to do this again sometime. Thanks a lot.